Last summer, a group of British farmers launched an appeal for famine relief. It was called Send a Ton to Africa, and its aim was to raise £1 million, enough to buy 10,000 tons of wheat. By mid-October, the first shipment of 1,000 tons was already being loaded in the port of Hull. Its destination was a place few people had even heard of, Eritrea. Africa's 4-year drought, which has strangled food production across the continent, has been felt most severely in the Horn of Africa. But lack of rain isn't the only cause of famine. The problem has been made worse by a 23-year war between Ethiopia and its rebel northern province, Eritrea. Eritrea is about the size of England, with a population of 3.5 million. Although the Ethiopian army controls the main towns like the capital Asmara and the ports of Assab and Massawa, most of the rural areas are under the control of the Eritrean People's Liberation Front, or EPLF. Cut off by their enemy to the south, their only access to the outside world is through Sudan and the Red Sea port of Port Sudan. The supply route into Eritrea must be one of the most difficult and dangerous in the world. Convoys of trucks, like this one carrying American wheat, make the 200-mile journey and rarely get out of second gear. They start among the blowing sands of the desert before climbing up dry river beds through mountains which rise to 8,000 feet. As the Eritrean border approaches, the Kalashnikov rifles appear. The war, which I'd only read about, began to seem very real indeed. As the trucks move deeper into Eritrea, the danger of daylight bombing will slow their progress even more. Back in England, I'd assumed, naively as it turns out, that once the wheat got to Port Sudan, its journey would be over. But in fact, the journey from Port Sudan to the Eritrean border alone takes 24 hours, and it can be done in daylight. Once you get inside Eritrea, of course, it's a different story altogether. You've got to travel at night, averaging no more than 5 miles an hour. The roads are terrible, the lorries overloaded, and the wear and tear must be enormous. It all goes to show how desperately they need this wheat. My own transport, provided by the Eritrean Relief Association, or ERA, was a bit faster, but a great deal less comfortable. The journey from Port Sudan to the EPLF base camp would still take 12 hours, so we pressed on through the African night to get there by dawn. Next morning, I expected to find myself in a small town full of activity. Instead, I was in a seemingly deserted mountain valley. Because of the bombing, Eritrea is under a daytime curfew. Everything is camouflaged. At first light, even the telltale tracks left by our nighttime arrival were scratched out. The jeep itself was hidden under a tree, some sacking tied over the windscreen to prevent reflections. I was staying in a well-concealed guest house built into the side of a mountain. Out on the veranda, two of ERA's staff joined me to help map out the rest of my route. Now, where's Tisane?
Tisane is near the border in the Sudan. It's when you reach Zara, then you can go to...
ERA has offices around the world to promote the Eritrean cause and collect money for food and medical aid. Women are especially prominent in the organization, as they are in all aspects of Eritrean life.
Well, it depends. Yes, you can live...
Askalu is responsible for food distribution within the country, while Gebre Mikhail helps organize the transport. With last night's journey still in mind, I wondered about his problems.
It's very expensive, and that is one of the areas that we badly need assistance. You see, this is an emergency situation, and our logistical capacity is so limited that we need to reinforce our fleet of trucks. And because it's an emergency situation, that we need to get things at the right time and in the right quantity. So we really need assistance in this area.
Are you saying you want trucks more than food?
No, but we equally need, food and trucks, because without the trucks, even if you give us food, given our present capacity, we will not be able to reach, the hundreds of thousands of people who are in dire need,
Before setting out up country where the wheat was going, I wanted to locate the EPLF's hidden base camp, especially the hospital, about which I'd heard so much. Eventually, my eye began to pick out landscape features which didn't look quite right. When I was brought here first thing this morning and told that this was the main hospital in Eritrea, I thought it was some form of elaborate practical joke, because to me it looks just like a dried-out river valley in some rugged, if pretty spectacular countryside. But the closer you look, you begin to see little doors like the one I've just come out of. That's where they store all the drugs they use here. And further down this 3.5-mile valley, you find all the departments you'd expect in a big hospital: orthopedic, cardiovascular, and all the other ones, complete, of course, with a full-blown operating theatre. So what looks like just a valley with its wandering camels and goats and nomads is, in fact, a 1,200-bed hospital. Trees were the clue. Under every clump, there'd be a makeshift ward sheltering a few patients. The hospital has 12 qualified doctors, and one of them, Dr. Mikhail, led me into the cardiovascular unit, tucked into the side of a mountain. Here I was given my first awful glimpse of the reality of war.
We have here is a fighter, and he stepped on a landmine, and he sustained a very bad injury.
Yes.
He has an amputation of the left leg and abdominal injury. He also has some amputation of the fingers too.
But most of the patients were not fighters. A few days earlier, 4 Ethiopian MiGs had spotted something moving on the ground and dropped 14 cluster bombs. Their target turned out to have been a school. 3 children were killed and 13 injured.
She's about she's 15 years old.
Yes.
And she sustained a chest injury as well as fracture of the humerus. And we put this airplane cast because the fracture was very high at the head of the humerus. And this is the way you treat them. Come here, Lucky. Hold her, Lucky.
These children seem pretty brave, Doctor.
They are brave because they are among the fighters, and this one sustained an injury on his elbow region, quite a bad one. Actually, the arm was dangling, and the arteries, the nerves, they were all cut. He has a very bad fracture. And because he came in a very short time after his injury, we were able to save his arm. We repaired the arteries, and we connected the muscles, the bone, and his hand, we managed to save the hand, the arm.
So he'll be able to use his arm again?
Yes.
It seemed remarkable that sophisticated operations like these could be performed under such conditions. Can you tell him from us how brave we think he is, please? Even so, there's a desperate shortage of drugs and medicines. All these children had to relieve their pain was aspirin. Another problem which makes the patient's recovery slower than it should be is simply lack of food. The basic diet is lentils and bread made from sorghum, or dura as it's called locally. There's no fruit, no vegetables, no milk, and hardly any meat. Scurvy and anemia are rampant. But from another doctor, I got an even more depressing picture of what life is really like.
Yes, famine is everywhere in Eritrea. I think this is, in my life, this is the worst year we have had in terms of drought. Everywhere there are farmers, everywhere there is famine, there is people who are dying, and the livestock are dying, and they are getting fewer and fewer. A family or a group of families which had 12 camels in the past are left with 1 or 2, and some people who had more than 120 goats have now 4 or 5. So you see how the livestock is dwindling, and with the dwindling livestock, there is a risk and there is actual happening of people dying out of starvation.
Most Eritreans live off the land, and at least half of them, about 1.25 million, are now in desperate need of food. ERA's response has been to set up a network of distribution centres. Like everything else I saw in Eritrea, these were disciplined and incredibly well organised. At this centre, people from villages up to 30 miles away converged in the late afternoon. As they arrived, they were seated in rows. ERA has a detailed record of every villager's name, and each head of family is summoned in turn. The ration is 500 grams per person per day, just over £1, and they take away a 20-day supply. Over the next 4 days, 13,000 people from 14 villages will be fed. The people I saw here looked thin and hungry, but as my ERA guide explained, these were the strong ones who could make the journey.
These people, the farthest point they came was 11 hours walk. So some of them came yesterday. But there are some people who have been left behind, those who are infirm, unable to walk, the weak, the sick, and the disabled. And they delegate their neighbors to bring their share. And this is being vouched by the headman, the head of the village.
In normal times, these people grow sorghum after the summer rains, and their goats and camels provide them with meat and milk. But the last harvest they had was 5 years ago.
Since 1980, the drought has become very severe in Eritrea. And farmers were unable to farm anything. But being farmers, they never gave up hope. So last year and this year, when there was very little rain, they did some farming, and instead of harvesting crop, they harvested dust. There is no other place to go. They come to ERA for help. Our aim, ERA's aim, is to help the people while they are still alive. The situation in Eritrea is extremely serious, but it is not like in other countries where the drought victims are dying and dropping like fly. We will not reach that stage. We are fighting to stop our people from dying. So this is the time to help them before it gets too late. If it reaches the dying stage, then no amount of medicine or food will be able to help them or to recover them or to bring them into life.
With the present level of food in the country, in Eritrea right now, how long can you last before the whole country just runs out of food?
I can't say how long, but because we don't have anything now. Whatever comes from abroad is right away trucked from Port Sudan and sent to distribution centers like the one you're seeing now. So we don't have anything in stock.
حسن محمد حامد نساء ملابس حسن محمد حامد.
Meanwhile, the war between a hungry Eritrea and an equally hungry Ethiopia continues. So also does the distribution of wheat, as twilight gives way to night.
VTR number 893247, Farming Diary, Hidden Famine, Part 2.
Today, there is only enough food in Eritrea to feed 1 in 20 of the population. These families are nomads who have turned up at an outpost of the Eritrean Relief Association in the hope of getting food. They're in luck. A few bags have been kept in reserve. But I saw a sight I hope I shall never see again. Children eating wheat. Not bread, not porridge, but wheat, simply soaked in water. After the children, it was the mother's turn to grab not just for themselves, but for their babies who missed out earlier. Every spilt grain is picked up out of the sand. They know they won't eat again until the trucks arrive, and nobody knows when that will be.
The international figure for subsistence level is, the minimum subsistence level is 180 kilograms per person per year. For a family, that would be about 1 ton for a family of 5.
Now, what about the quality of wheat? Do you mind about whether it is baking quality or any other sort of quality?
Now, at the present time, we are so desperate that we are not in a position to choose. Any quality edible would be acceptable.
But can Eritrea ever hope to feed itself? The answer is yes, providing it rains. This is sorghum, a very drought-resistant plant that is the staple food in this part of Africa. Given a little rain, it will produce a crop in 12 weeks. I was there in November, the main harvest month. But during my 3 weeks in Eritrea, this was the only food production I saw. It was in the fertile valley of the Gash River on an old estate called Ali Gadir. 10 years ago, it must have been the showpiece of Eritrean agriculture. This water tower lies at the heart of what was once an Italian-owned cotton plantation. Run by the Baratolo family, it used the flat land around here to produce cotton, irrigated from the river Gash by way of a man-made lake and complicated channels. The cotton was then shipped to Asmara, where it was processed into textiles. But in 1974, after the overthrow of the Haile Selassie regime, the new Ethiopian government nationalized the outfit. And 3 years later, in '77, the last Italians left and production came to a complete halt. Today, Ali Gadir is dead, the farmland largely unused. The farm machinery is rusting scrap, and none of this is because of drought. Ali Gadir has been fought over for a decade. After a bloody conflict in January of this year, the EPLF captured the area from the Ethiopians. But what was once a farm is now a derelict battlefield. It could be growing excellent crops, but it isn't. And so Eritrea is entirely dependent on food aid for survival. Back home, I'd been told that such aid usually does more harm than good by disrupting the local agriculture. It didn't seem a convincing argument here.
No, you see, the local agriculture is already damaged. It cannot be damaged any further. We don't need any other external factor to have it damaged. Now we have the choice of survival. People are here, they don't have any food, and the choice is between living and dying, and they can die easily. But if they are going to live, they must get some food from outside.
There are certain countries in the world, especially the EEC country, who dump every year tons and tons of food into the sea. And this is, in fact, we in Eritrea, we have an ocean of empty stomachs. And we would like this rich country to dump this food into Eritrea.
What we need is, first is wheat, second is butter or butter oil, and third will be milk. This will be in that order.
The consequences of ignoring these pleas will spread beyond Eritrea, into neighboring Sudan, for instance. So far, 500,000 refugees have crossed the border in search of something, anything, to eat. Their journey usually ends in camps like this, where there were 500 people from the nomadic Beja tribe. But there was no food to be had here either. Sudan has a famine of its own. The children that came out to see us were thin enough. But when I stooped to look inside the pathetic shelters, I realized I was in a death camp.
This is a case of keratomalacia, which is a form of vitamin A deficiency. The child is 5 years old, and it does not weigh more than a child of 9 months of age.
Now, you've been to many, many places around the world. How does this camp here and this famine here compare with what you've seen elsewhere?
I have never seen anything worse than this in my whole life, working for WHO and other organizations throughout the world, either in Africa or in Southeast Asia or in the Americas. Never. Anything like it. This is the worst that I've seen. Maybe the total number of population is not all that great, but the severity, the intensity, the number of cases, the prevalence of malnutrition is so high that I've never come across something quite like this before in my whole life. And we're seeing only the tip of the iceberg. The people here are the worst ones off, but a lot of them are dying each day. So the bucket is being refilled from the reservoir just about 1 mile away. And that bucket, which contains 2,000 people, is again being refilled from the 20,000 lying across beyond those mountains. Food is relatively easy to get at the Port Sudan level. The difficult thing is to get it from Port Sudan into the mouths of the people that need it. And the government, or whoever will take in charge this operation, must be ready to face at least 1 year in the hope, inshallah, that the rains will come next year and be able to feed this population.
The Eritreans know well that once their people get to places like this, they're unlikely to return. But to stop the flow of refugees, they must be able to offer food. If Dr. Naraya's estimate is correct, then Eritrea will need 250,000 tons of wheat just to tide them over until the next harvest, always assuming that the rains come. But no government recognizes Eritrea. And with the exception of War on Want, no aid agency will jeopardize their work in Ethiopia by coming here. The Eritreans are on their own.
The only thing that they can do is just appeal to the international community, and it looks now that our appeal is receiving more and more hearing ears, like the British farmers, which we are very thankful and grateful, for the assistance that they are rendering to the Eritrean people. And I would like to assure them that these people will have a special place in the hearts of the Eritrean people, because they have come to the help of the Eritrean people at the hour of their need.
Send a Ton to Africa has so far delivered just 2,000 tons, some of which was arriving as I left. That's only 1% of what they need. In the past few weeks, we've seen the drought, we've seen the famine, and most encouragingly of all, we've seen that the Eritreans actually have the organization to ensure that the wheat reaches the people who need it most. I just hope that this is the first of many loads, because one thing is certain: we in Europe, with our wonderful harvests, cannot just sit back and wait while Africa starves. Saturday afternoon, a remote mountain valley in Eritrea. The local concert group is playing to a full house. But, as usual in Eritrea, things are not quite as they appear. The performers are Ethiopian prisoners of war, as is half the audience. The other half, the ones with the Kalashnikovs, are their captors, fighters of the Eritrean People's Liberation Front, the EPLF. The friendly and relaxed atmosphere isn't entirely due to the local beer, aptly called Sua. These Ethiopians are free prisoners. Their government doesn't want them back, in case they've been infected by ideas of Eritrean independence. They've nowhere to go, a forgotten people in a forgotten war. The plight of these prisoners of war is just a small item in the catalogue of misery in the Horn of Africa. The famine has gripped the imagination of the world, but it isn't the only cause of hardship. Endless civil wars are as much to blame, and the most brutal is that between Ethiopia and its rebel northern province, Eritrea. Eritrea is about the size of England, with a population of 3.5 million. Its main towns, the capital Asmara and the ports of Massawa and Assab, are controlled by the Ethiopian army. But the rural areas are firmly in the hands of the EPLF. But 40 years ago, this was someone else's battleground.
From the edge of the Red Sea come these pictures of the fall of Eritrea. The area covered by our filming correspondent centers around the capital Asmara and its chief port, Massawa.
Eritrea had been an Italian colony from 1889 to the Second World War. Then the British Army, sweeping up from the south, scored the first success of their African campaign. In 1941, they forced the Italians to surrender the capital, Asmara.
Details of the armistice were immediately gone into, and the conversations carried out in a shadow. All sorts of things were arranged, including a curfew, the observance of British summertime, and all traffic keeping to the left of the road instead of the right. When it was all over, the Italians departed.
The fall of Massawa completed the rout. For the next 10 years, Eritrea would be governed by the British, while the United Nations decided the future of Italy's former colonies.
The Admiral Defender of Massawa was decidedly camera shy, and I was rudely told to go somewhere. Well, that's that. I don't care much for the place, but it means the end of Italy's possession of Eritrea.
Eritrea's claim for independence was rejected by the UN, and in 1962, Haile Selassie formally annexed the territory. Fighting broke out and has continued ever since. Now, in its 23rd year, it's become Africa's longest war. As the fighting intensified, thousands of refugees were uprooted from their homelands. But in the last year, Eritreans have had another reason to leave their country: famine. So far, 500,000 have streamed into neighboring Sudan in search of something, anything, to eat. Their journey usually ends in a camp like this. These children have walked with their families for days, only to find there is no food here either. Sudan has a famine of its own. For the few aid workers in the region, the scale of the problem is overwhelming.
This is a case of keratomalacia, which is a form of vitamin A deficiency. The child is 5 years old, and it does not weigh more than a child of 9 months of age.
Now, you've been to many, many places around the world. How does this camp here and this famine here compare with what you've seen elsewhere?
I have never seen anything worse than this in my whole life, working for WHO and other organizations throughout the world, either in Africa or in Southeast Asia or in the Americas. Never. Anything like it. This is the worst that I've seen. Maybe the total number of population is not all that great, but the severity, the intensity, the number of cases, the prevalence of malnutrition is so high that I've never come across something quite like this before in my whole life. And we're seeing only the tip of the iceberg. The people here are the worst ones off, but a lot of them are dying each day. So the bucket is being refilled from the reservoir just about 1 mile away. And that bucket, which contains 2,000 people, is again being refilled from the 20,000 lying across beyond those mountains.
There is no food because there was a drought. You cannot eat because you have no food. You cannot live because your animals are dead. You cannot be a man because you have no sons, no wives, no daughters. And there's no place to go.
And is the answer in the short run food from the West, or is that not the answer? In the short run?
In the short run. In order that there be any hope at all in the long run, we have got to keep the people alive so that there be a long run. What we are doing now is a Band-Aid operation. It is a huge Band-Aid because the wound is so great. True, if we do not apply the Band-Aid, the people will die, and then there is nothing.
Back in Eritrea, the population is totally dependent on food aid. Cut off from the supplies pouring into Ethiopia, the Eritrean Relief Association, ERA, has had to fend for itself. What little food they get, they distribute through a network of feeding centres. Like everything else in Eritrea, these are disciplined and very well organised. ERA has a record of every villager's name, and each head of family is summoned in turn. The ration is 500 grams per person per day, just over a pound, and they take away a 20-day supply. Normally, these people grow sorghum, while their goats and camels provide meat and milk. But the last harvest they had was 5 years ago, and now their animals are dead. Everyone looked thin and hungry, but as my ERA guide explained, these people were the strong ones who could make the journey.
These people, the farthest point they came was 11 hours walk. So some of them came yesterday. But there are some people who have been left behind, those who are infirm, unable to walk, the weak, the sick, and the disabled. And they delegate their neighbors to bring their share. And this has been vouched by the headman, the head of the village. Our aim, ERA's aim, is to help the people where they are still alive. The situation in Eritrea is extremely serious, but it is not like in other countries where the drought victims are dying and dropping like fly. We will not reach that stage. We are fighting to stop our people from dying. So this is the time to help them before it gets too late. If it reaches the dying stage, then no amount of medicine or food will be able to help them or to recover them or to bring them into life.
With the present level of food in the country, in Eritrea right now, how long can you last before the whole country just runs out of food?
I can't say how long, but because we don't have anything now. Whatever comes from abroad is right away trucked from Port Sudan and sent to distribution centers like the one you're seeing now. So we don't have anything in stock.
Prominent at these food distribution centers, as everywhere else in Eritrea, are the EPLF with their Kalashnikov rifles. They not only fight the war, they also organize every aspect of life in the country. Any Eastern European politician would find it all very familiar, because it's organized on classic Marxist-Leninist lines with its Politburo and its Central Committee. But herein lies the paradox, because the EPLF's enemy is the Marxist regime in Addis Ababa of Colonel Mengistu, and behind him, providing the MiGs, the fragmentation bombs, and the napalm, is the Soviet Union itself. This terrifying assortment of weapons has driven Eritreans underground. They've become a camouflaged society. There is a daytime curfew. Nothing moves except a few nomads and their camels. People live under trees or in huts built into the sides of mountains. Some of these are quite substantial, and often the vegetation is deliberately planted. It was from just such a shelter that one day emerged a small procession. As they approached, they were welcomed by our Eritrean guides. Major, you were shot down this year, were you? To my surprise, they turned out to be VIP prisoners of war. 2 Ethiopian colonels and a MiG pilot shot down 9 months earlier.
Then while I was flying low and searching for targets to be destroyed, all of a sudden I had a shot.
Major Petros was one of the Ethiopian Air Force's most experienced pilots, having been trained in both America and Russia. But what can you see from when you're flying? Because it must be very difficult.
Yes, it's difficult when it is when they are not engaged. When they have engaged, they expose themselves all of a sudden because they have to move out of the hiding places and the camouflage and so forth. By that time, you can see the moving targets. But if it is, hiding and in a hiding place and camouflage, it's very hard to see them.
A few days earlier, 4 MiGs had seen something moving on the ground. They dropped 14 cluster bombs. Their target turned out to have been a school. 3 children were killed and 13 injured.
If you are assigned to do it, if you are ordered to bombard certain places and so forth, of course you do go and bombard them.
Let's go and take a look at some of the children, shall we? The wounded children had been taken to a hospital ward, tucked into a hillside.
She's 15 years old.
Yes.
And she sustained a chest injury as well as fracture of the humerus. And we put this airplane cast because the fracture was very high at the head of the humerus. And this is the way you treat them. Come here, Lahi.
These children seem pretty brave, Doctor.
They are brave because they are among the fighters, and this one sustained an injury on his elbow region, quite a bad one. Actually, the arm was dangling, and the arteries, the nerves, they were all cut. He has a very bad fracture. And because he came in a very short time after his injury, we were able to save his arm. We repaired the arteries and we connected the muscles, the bone, and his hand, we managed to save the arm.
So he'll be able to use his arm again?
Yes.
It seemed remarkable that sophisticated operations like these could be performed under such conditions. Can you tell him from us how brave we think he is, please? There's a desperate shortage of drugs and medicines. All these children had to relieve their pain was aspirin. In the evening, the generators come on, and after a day spent tending his patients, Dr. Mikhail heads for the operating theatre. His first operation is a routine one, mending a severed artery in the thigh, the result of a shrapnel wound. In the next door theatre, another fighter was having a leg amputated. Dr. Mikhail's list of operations would keep him busy until well into the night, all performed with a lack of facilities that would appall a Western doctor.
Facilities, we mean surgical instruments, operating theater equipment, tables, lamps. There's quite a diversity of them. But primarily we need the instruments because we have to go to the front line and do the first aid treatment, first aid surgery. And in that we are hampered because, as I said, we have a lack of instruments.
When did you last have a holiday?
That's a very difficult question. No, I didn't have any holiday for the last 6 or 7 years.
When did you last have a day off?
Actually, we don't have a day off the way you're thinking. Because every day there is always something to do, something to offer, something to serve. So we do not consider our time in terms of days of service and days of time off. It's to us always busy, and we serve as much as we could. And we think of the future as something that we have to serve more.
This commitment to their cause is overwhelming amongst Eritreans. The country has nothing to live off. It has no income, so there's no cash. No one is paid anything. They are locked in a fight against what they see as Ethiopian colonialism.
Every day you see something that reminds you that you have to do more and that you're really under oppression, and that, that reminds you that you are an Eritrean. Because as you can see around you, civilians, young children, women, old people, these are victims of the war. And every time I see them, I feel that I belong to a certain group of community in this world, and that I have to do something to alleviate the problem.
The turning point in Askalu's life was the compulsory teaching of the Ethiopian language.
Because, the first thing is the Amharic language is there. We are forced to use Amharic in school. And there's no Tigrinya books to read because they were burned and you have to use Amharic. So you feel it because you want to speak in Tigrinya, you want to read books, you want to know the Eritrean people's stories in Tigrinya, but they are not available. It's Amharic. So that's where you start to feel it. You wish to be free to talk, free to write, free to express your ideas, free to get work, free to do what benefits, what you think benefits the society or the community. That's what really we wanted or we demanded from the beginning.
Is that what you're still demanding?
Of course, this is what we are still demanding.
Nothing has changed?
Nothing has changed.
A symbol of that struggle is the town of Nakfa. Destroyed by Ethiopian bombing in 1979, its ruins have been fought over ever since. Today, it's a couple of miles inside the Eritrean front lines. The only building that still has a roof is the mosque. Nakfa was once a thriving town of 7,000 people, but nobody lives here now. The Ethiopians still bomb the town, though, just to deter anyone from returning. To say that Nakfa is a ghost town is really an understatement, because this was once the main street, tree-lined, shops on either side, and today it's nothing. The population of the town is scattered throughout the country in a series of displaced peoples camps, all of which add to the strain on the pretty meager resources of the Eritrean Relief Association. I've seen the effects of hunger and of drought on this country, but before I came to Nakfa, I had no conception of the damage that war has done. Between them, war and drought have left an estimated 1.25 million Eritreans on the point of starvation, totally dependent on Western wheat.
The international figure for subsistence level is, the minimum subsistence level is 180 kilograms per person per year. For a family, that would be about 1 ton for a family of 5.
Now, would you have any message for European farmers right now who've just enjoyed the biggest harvest they've ever had?
Well, the message is clear. If there is the biggest harvest in Europe, there is the worst time here in Eritrea. And I think it is their obligation, and that they should help us at this time in which the survival of hundreds of thousands of Eritreans is in danger.
Eritrea will need 250,000 tons of wheat in the next 12 months. In a country without a single paved road, the distribution problems alone are enormous. Once these trucks coming from Port Sudan cross the border into Eritrea, they will only travel at night because of the threat of bombing. It's a slow and difficult operation, but the Eritrean organization and determination is equal to the task. The food will get through to those who need it. Sadly, in Ethiopia, that's not always the case. In the village of Galmaika on the Sudanese border, I came across the evidence. The local merchants displayed a range of Western aid, like this skimmed milk powder. It was all for sale.
This has been donated by the United States government to the Ethiopian Relief Commission to be distributed to the drought victim within Ethiopia. But the Ethiopian government is giving part of this shipment to the army, and the army sold it to Eritrean traders. And these traders have brought it here. And from here, Sudanese traders take it to sell it into the Sudan.
Each bag of skimmed milk fetches about $50 in the Sudan, so it's clearly a profitable business. But this sort of racket, however spectacular, is far from being typical. That the trade exists at all only underlines how desperate people are for food. But while people starve, the war goes on. It's a war the Ethiopians can't afford to lose because they need the Eritrean outlets to the Red Sea. But it's also a war they almost certainly can't win. These Eritreans may only have captured guns and grenades to fight with, but they are highly motivated. The Ethiopian government likes to dismiss them as guerrillas, but those officers who've been captured take a different view. Do you in the Ethiopian army regard the EPLF as a regular army or as guerrillas?
Well, this is the government policy. Well, the government is considering them as a guerrilla.
Do they fight like guerrillas or do they fight like regular troops?
Well, they were fighting as a regular troops. I saw him then. They were very strong. They were very good fighters.
He's a better soldier because he has a cause to fight for. And their army, forcibly conscripted, is not convinced about what is happening in Eritrea. They don't have any interest to fight this war.
At an orphanage by a mountain pool, 600 children get their weekly wash. When their parents were this age, the war had already started. One generation later, the prospects are even grimmer. With no sign of an end to drought or war, these children face a future of famine, or fighting, or both.
We never think of giving up. We have either to achieve what we are aiming at or to die.